Welcome to our final panel for today, where we try to understand how our boarding school environments can best support and nurture our teenagers. The emotional rollercoaster of teen life can present a raft of challenges. These can be really tricky to navigate from a distance, and as parents, it's often hard to be that person on the other end of an emotional distance dump over the phone. Here we'll discuss how well equipped our boarding staff are to handle the challenges of daily teen life and how best we can support our kids from a distance and support those caring for them in the boarding house. Tom Dunsmore is the CEO of Torres Strait Meta, catering for students from the outer islands of the Torres Strait. Meta has been awarded one of the top 10 First Nations education programs in Australia for the cultural focus, and in particular, the Meta dance team. Prior to this, for over 10 years, Tom was the General Manager at the Australian Boarding Schools Association, supporting boarding schools in Australia with training, consultancy, industry and partnership developments. Dr. Lisa Fahey is a registered psychologist of over 30 years. She has focused her practice in areas of support to individuals and families with high and complex psychological needs, challenging behaviour and trauma recovery. Dr. Fahey has a passion for targeted analysis with a flexible, innovative, multidiscipline approach to shaping therapeutic intervention across a range of settings. Dr. Fahey's PhD thesis in 2014 focused on an investigation of the impact of carer psychological profile on capacity to care for high needs and traumatised clients, along with testing insights around building resilient and sustainable carer models. She continues to write focused action research papers and develops software and training platforms to optimise wellbeing and mental health for clients and carers. This year, 2023, Dr. Fahey was honoured with the Order of Australia for services to psychology and medicine. She's also a mum to 5 terrific humans and has been a parent of 4 boarding students. Ruby Reithmuller is the founder and director of Womankind. It's a female-led youth mental health organisation on a mission to close the gap in effective wellbeing education and support for adolescent girls and gender-diverse young people. Ruby has led Womankind in the development and launch of school wellbeing workshops, a first-of-its-kind social wellness app, the Womankind app, Dear Sister podcast, merchandise, parent training seminars, collaborations and online resources that are delivering mental health education and support to adolescents. Since founding Womankind, Ruby has grown the community to over 5,000 people. She's been shortlisted for the Young Australian of the Year award, selected as a Future Woman Rural Scholarship recipient, and nominated for the New South Wales Woman of the Year award. Ruby grew up in regional New South Wales and attended Ascombe School on a boarding scholarship. Finally, for this panel, we have Mrs. Kate Kovacs. She's the Director of Boarding at Loreto, Normanhurst. Kate commenced her employment with the school in 1992 as a personal development, health and physical education teacher and a religion teacher as well. In 2003, she became a house coordinator and in 2005 became the Deputy Director of the boarding school until she took up her current position as Director of Boarding in 2010. Prior to commencing at Loreto Normanhurst, Mrs. Kovacs taught in schools in country New South Wales and Queensland. She has a Bachelor of Education and a Certificate in Residential Care. Kate is the current Chair of the Australian Boarding Schools Association New South Wales Heads of Boarding and the Vice Chair of the Australian Heads of Boarding. She presents regularly for ABSA on areas of best practice in the boarding setting and is an accredited boarding practitioner, Level 4. Enjoy this panel. Well, thank you all for joining us today. I guess one of the things I wanted to talk about here in this session, when we're talking about teen mental health and the emotional ups and downs that happen for teenagers in their everyday life. Tom, I'll ask you, with ABSA, the Australian Boarding Schools Association, how well do you think the boarding staff are equipped to handle these emotional ups and downs?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me, Amanda. I think there's a couple of things. One would be mainly the training ABSA offers. There's a lot of training that goes into boarding schools and boarding staff nowadays, and I think a lot of it is around how do we communicate with boarding students, how do we work with parents, how do we look at the transition from home, especially that year 6, year 7 phase into high school and boarding, because that's a major, I guess, piece of the puzzle when it comes from families moving kids into boarding. And just, yeah, mainly really around communication, I believe, as well as how do parents connect with staff and more so boarding staff being professional in the conversations with parents. And if they've got background and about how that child could be supported, it just makes a stronger, I guess, case for that conversation. Some of my recent, I guess, experience comes from actually up in the Torres Strait on Thursday Island. But it helps so much when you actually know the background of the child, where they've been, where they're from, if it's a country town or if it's a isolated area, what their experience was at school, and usually they might have different trigger points. So if boarding staff can know what happens prior, they usually can work much better with the kid while they're in the boarding house as well. So just having that open dialogue and trusting your boarding school. It's a big decision to send your child to boarding school, so put all the trust in there you can, because the more information they know, the better probably outcomes they'll have with that child and family as well. So yeah, trust is probably a really big thing for me as well within that space.
Mm. Well, I guess, trust, as it has to be earned. So what sort of confidence can we give to parents? Perhaps, Kate, if you could speak to this, in that, do you communicate with parents the skills and the training that boarding staff do? Or do you believe that trust is just built from a two-way communication over a number of years? How would you speak to that?
I think it's both, Amanda, and it is, and I agree with Tom. The more we know the children and the parents before they start, the greater the rate of success. And to start the process to send your child to boarding school, whether you've been planning it since birth and it was a given because you're in such an isolated area, or whether it's been just a recent decision, especially to do interviews in for schools in year 5 to come in year 7, and then to make that jump to actually it's starting now is a really big process. And the more engagement we have, and the more the child feels like they know what their home away from home is going to look like, the better. So at Loreto now, we actually have 2 opportunities for parent gathering before the children start in year 7. So we do a transition to boarding program, and then we do an orientation program. And part of that also includes some social activities for the parents, the gatherings for parents to get to know one another, to find that that common ground, to ask those questions that it might be their 3rd or 4th or 5th last child coming, and for others it's the first. And my thing is, I think the first and the last are always the hardest. The ones in the middle seem to go along with the flow, but you are changing the dynamics of your family when your children start coming away to boarding. So it's a big move. So we, at transition and at orientation, I will talk to the parents about what we need, what engagement we would like with them, that partnership that we really want. I talk about what we provide. And then hopefully also the girls aren't just ringing home saying, that social media or that phone is in their hands constantly. Not ringing home and just saying my day was terrible. It was, guess what I learnt today, is also part of it. So that's an important part, is all the different communication things that you have. Yeah.
I guess the thing is that it does happen, and those calls home, and perhaps boarding staff aren't always aware of that.
No.
So would you have any tips, having obviously worked as a clinical director for over 30 years in dealing with trauma recovery in high needs teenagers, can you give any advice to parents on how to perhaps handle those distance dumps, the ones, where the kids ring home and it may really be a traumatic situation for them, but in reality, it's normal daily occurrences. They don't get to go home and offload. They're back in a boarding house with 30, 40 or 50 other kids of varying ages.
Super tricky, isn't it? Because so much of it's about the context of the family and the way the values within the family have reacted. And sometimes that reactivity is part of the way people feel heard and that they feel cared for and nurtured. So I think it's a very sort of complex discussion we're having, because it is all about how family fit with this sort of distance relationship. And some are really mature and prepared, as you flagged, and it's a well-worn expectation, and others not so much. One of the things I thought is sort of probably worth mentioning is so much of the way it's set up and the values of the school and the identity of boarders in school and the way that's communicated in the preparation is super important. And I would say as a protective factor, it's also about having that linkage with a key person in the boarding system. And that doesn't necessarily need to be a senior person, but it does need to be a person. And that's where you get the opportunity to reality test what's actually happened. And I think that's probably, as a tip for a parent, a really important handbrake to make sure that you reality test with both the young person, but also with the boarding staff. What's the context, and also awareness of what's the broader context. My youngest daughter is currently in her final years with HSC, and we've been peppered even in the last 6 weeks with reminders from the boarding team saying, don't forget, trials are on, everything's pretty hectic. You will have tears and you will have SOS messages, and that's okay, and that's normal, and we've got this. And it's actually been really positive, I think, to have those reminders to the parent team to say, don't forget, this is actually hectic, and we have got a group of girls all, putting a lot of pressure on themselves to do well. So I think that proactive communication has been really helpful, not the sort of waiting for the check-in, certainly being, and then the process for parents to knowingly reality test the discussion.
When you say knowingly reality test, what do you mean?
Well, I think it's very easy when you're a long way away to perhaps fall into a very reactive space when your child's distressed, because you're so far away. And so I think the pause is super important. So when you get the SOS at 10 o'clock at night or 9:30 when the phones go in, that you actually make a commitment to check in the morning and then talk it through rather than necessarily, jump. I guess I'll just put a caveat against that, because my work is definitely in the space where we've got very, very distressed kids. And I would say that probably the one thing that I'm not confident I've seen done really well, and as I said, we've had 4 kids in boarding and 6 different schools, is that when there is a child that is under distress, that pastoral care around proactive management is probably an area where I think schools do struggle. And it is a specialist area. And I think that that's an area when you do have a partnership with a family where a child has, a pre-existing or an emerging challenge, that is something that really needs to be dealt with in a special way and in a very proactive way, with some safety planning and some agreements within the school. Really tricky, because no one wants to step into that space and put the red flag up. But if you don't, then it can be really problematic for everyone.
And Lisa, so in those situations, you would highlight, I guess, as Tom has and Kate, that it's important for families to have those conversations with the prospective school before they begin, so that, I think, Tom, you did mention in your current position on the Tiwis that there's the conversations you have with families being upfront.
So there's a couple of things. One is, I think every boarding staff should be trained in youth mental health, just as a basis, so they can understand why kids react maybe the way they are. But yeah, secondly is the parents' communication and support plans. They're only going to be effective if the boarding school knows exactly what's happening. And then we, like for us, I'm on Thursday Island in the Torres Strait, we can connect with organisations and community support to get intervention and help when needed. But if we don't know the full story up front, we don't know why they're acting the way they are. We're just making assumptions most of the time. If there's not a forward support plan in place, then it's very difficult to manage it effectively. So it's really important to, I think, get that sorted before it happens. And I think sometimes parents get a bit nervous whether they think the school's not going to accept the kid first or whatever that may be. But I think in the case, if you talk it through with the head of boarding in the school, you'll be able to come up with a plan that suits everyone. Or in some cases, it literally may be boarding school might not be the best option because of what you've heard, what you've discussed, but it's got to be an open discussion. Otherwise, yeah, you're risking everything really. So I think it's just so important to have those conversations. And then also allows the boarding school to prepare for what may occur. Kate might have something to add from boarding school perspective as well.
Yeah. And do you think, Tom or Kate, you could speak to this, the actual training that ABSA provides in the mental health space, do you think that's extensive enough? Can you talk us through a bit of that and what training is provided?
Yeah, so at ABSA, we've partnered with an organisation who specialise in mental health to provide base level training for staff. I don't think boarding staff in general should be extensively trained in youth mental health because they need to know when to pass the buck forward or up to a professional who can actually deal with the situation. Because a boarding staff already does a lot in a boarding house. You can't spend one-on-one time looking after a mental health issue who needs a professional. So they just need to know when is the right time. So they don't need to have that foundation training, which I think we do well. But then it's just, again, having that discussion first so they know when and how to move that, I guess, forward so it can go to a professional.
I'd agree with Tom there. All our staff do, all our senior staff, the ones who mainly care for the girls, we've got lots of assistants and that, but all of them have to do their youth mental health first aid certificate along with, first aid and CPR, etc. There's some standard things that come into it now. Ours all engage with the ABSA courses that are on offer as well. But I do agree with Tom, and I think it is the more we know, the better understanding we have, our engagement and that with our school counsellors and how they work with our boarders as a priority, and how we seek, how we then work with the parents to seek either some outside support or, and further, and that can be quite extensive support sometimes. And other times it is making decisions about where is the best place for the child to receive this care at this point in time. And we would always be looking for expert, and the right people. I'm, as a person who engages my staff, I'm not engaging counsellors, I'm engaging boarding staff, and we want to use the right people for the right roles.
I just want to throw to Ruby for a minute because Ruby's organisation, Womankind, you do work in this space, support work and mentor work, and Lisa made a really good point just a bit earlier about ensuring that your child has found an older person, that doesn't have to be the boarding master or mistress. It might be a member of staff that works in the boarding house, or I guess even an older student. Ruby, Womankind is working with schools. Can you tell us a bit about that and how you came to be involved in this space?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think having been a boarder myself, I really realised that there was this really great opportunity to create an external source of wellbeing support that can work in collaboration with boarding schools. So a lot of our programs are delivered by ex-boarders. If we're in the boarding house, they're all delivered by ex-boarders who are all trained in mental health first aid. And as you said, Amanda, it's all about kind of being a big mentor to these students as opposed to a more formal or clinical figure. We also have a referral network, which we use in collaboration with the schools if something does need to be escalated beyond our kind of means or capacity. But what we're really focused on is more protecting and preventing the well-being and optimizing their mental health, regardless of the absence or presence of a mental illness. So really trying to intervene before a situation is heightened. And all of our programs are all about lifting each other up, and our model is all about peer-to-peer support. So how we can, ensure that the girls have the right tools to support their friends, and then be able to support themselves if their friends do come to them with their struggles. So yeah, really about empowerment and education around mental health as well, the resources that are out there that they can access, and even things like how to have a conversation with your parents about wanting to see a psychologist, or how they're feeling. Even conversation prompts are things that we work on with them, just because sometimes they just don't know where to start when it comes to their mental health.
And do you think in working with teenagers, and often we're not talking about high trauma situations where of course those situations do happen when there's been a death of a family member or similar circumstances, and the child is living hours or a long way from home. But in the circumstances that we're talking about and trying to give parents some tools, Lisa, you mentioned before about, pausing, just taking the urgency off the situation when your child or your teenager calls you, having had a terrible day at school, or, whether it's a detention or a friend that's being cruel. I wondered, could you give parents some more, I guess it's hard sometimes for parents not to overreact and to take that pause.
And as I said before, it's tricky because it's horses for courses, and it does sort of leverage into the culture of the family and the culture of the school. And certainly in the experience we've had with different schools, it can be vastly different in terms of how those sorts of challenges are caught or not. And we've certainly had experiences where there's an acceptance that there's a culture of resilience, and that everyone has difficulties, and that those difficulties are accepted as something that need to be talked about and bounced through the school system and within the peers. And we've had situations where there's been a very much more sort of shut down approach from the school, where it's been really that's not a priority, that's something that's not important, really they're making a lot of fuss, and it's not something that's valued. So I really think it's a very tricksy connection between parents and their beliefs about what needs to be attended to and what's normal and what's not, and what a school values and how they express that in the way that they do their pastoral work. Having regular connections within the school is a really important, and some of the really successful times for our kids has been where schools have got rituals and come-togethers that are are collective and regular, and the kids feel really heard. And that tends to be a place then, if you do get that call, that you can say, well, don't forget you're doing your mentor catch-up, or you've got your home group, or you've got your the boarding collective that you're going to, and that's been really helpful, so that kids know that they can go and talk in those forums. But equally, I think, parents really need that coaching too, to be able to know what supports are available. And if you are worried about your child, that you can say to someone, can you just check in with them? And they will.
Yes.
Super important. And very busy place, the boarding school. I think
they certainly are. You've really highlighted that not only for the child to have someone they feel they can go to, or those mentor support groups and that in place, but also the parent to build the connections at the school. One of the things we talked about last year in this forum was building communities away from the places you call home. So really investing yourself into the school that you've chosen for your child, and making those connections too, so that when things do go awry, that you've got someone that you can call and say, what's the real deal here? Do we stand down, or do we need to jump in? Ruby, you're nodding. Do you speak to parents about this, or are you really just dealing with the kids?
We definitely do communicate with the parents quite a bit, but I think something, a tip that I would give parents when their kid is calling, whether they're in distress or whatever it is just to ask them really upfront what they need from their parent at that time. Do they want them to just listen, or do they want solutions? Because I think sometimes, parents jump in with solutions, which is obviously very well intentioned, and the young person just wants to kind of rant. So sometimes it's actually a matter of saying, what kind of support do you need in this moment? And maybe, changing your response in relation to that.
Mm. And Kate, as a director of boarding at Loreto, do you have conversations with parents? Like, I guess there's always tricky relationships. I mean, we can't always get on with every single parent, and vice versa. That's just being human. So do you have conversations with parents where you really try to explain to them or encourage them to really hear what's going on rather than getting upset and distressed themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, that comes with experience as well. And, I agree with Ruby. Sometimes it is just listen and because they need to vent, and they'd be venting if they were at home. As I always say to the parents, this behaviour, because sometimes parents go, oh, it's boarding school. If they were at home, they wouldn't be doing this. Yes, they would. There's a lot of this behaviour is just teenagers growing up and learning how to navigate relationships and life and build and be disappointed and learn and be excited. All of those things are part of growing up. So sometimes they just want to vent, or sometimes they're taking risks that are out of parents might see it as out of the norm. So yes, you often have to just say, take a breath, just listen. And parents do reach out. They're great. They're wonderful. They want to do the best for their children as well. And if you have that, you've got to have that partnership with them. We're not trying to parent, children in boarding school. We're in partnership with the parents to be there when they can't be. Everyone's chosen boarding for a variety of different reasons, but at a certain point in time, they're looking for us to say, can you just give them a hand at the moment? I'm too far away, and so we step in and we're always there. I always think it takes a whole village to do this role in a boarding school. It's not just one person. It's not just a director of boarding or one staff member that they like the most. It's so many different people hold every child up and are there advocates at all times as well. That's an important thing. That we're all advocating for the boarders in the day school space to make sure that they're listened to, they're seen, and that things are working for them and their families within the day school space. So parents, I had one last week. The mum just got in the car when her daughter rang and she was on her way, and I rang and just said, we need to do this without you bringing in more anxiety into the situation. So, yep, keep coming. Let's get you here. But and she was, halfway across the mountain. She'd driven for 6 hours, and had left at 4 o'clock in the morning because her daughter had, had a big upset the night before, and mum just wanted to be there. So, as a mum, that's what you want to do sometimes too, isn't it?
This is really important, Kate.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you there. When the schools speak about, we're not the parents, or, it's a team playing, we're being we're in the team together. It is hard as a parent, particularly when you had to send your children to boarding school and it is a long way away, not to react like that and go straight to the heart. So trying to put the head on just doesn't work when there's distance involved, and particularly, when you know your child. So I guess what parents would love to know, and this is what we speak to at our in-person events, families are always saying, which is the best school? And I sound like a broken down record when I say they are all good schools, but you have to look at the schools that match your family values and that speak to you in the way that you are used to and accustomed to, and because it is about the whole family. So you highlighting that mother's situation, I'm sure that happens all the time. The other thing, and I'll let you speak, is as parents, we have our L plates on. We've only done this once, twice, 3 times, in Lisa's case 5 times, but still we have our L plates on or our P plates. In the boarding school space, somebody with your experience, Kate, of 30 years, you've seen these situations hundreds, maybe even thousands of times. So is it hard sometimes not to give the empathy, and I'm not suggesting you for 1 minute, but sometimes is there that, oh, here we go again. Do you know what I mean? Is it hard to put that face on with this is this mother's first experience of this situation?
No, I don't believe it is. I think, I've got 3 children of my own, 5 grandchildren. One of them even moved back home because with twins, because she just said, you need your mum. So I know what it's like. And I think perhaps I have more empathy. I understand. I mean, I've never sent my children away. I think I'm better at it now than I was right at the beginning because I've seen so many experiences. And a mum getting in the car at 4 o'clock in the morning to drive across to be with her daughter before school, it was more just stop and have a coffee and we'll get her out. It doesn't matter if you're a bit late. All of those things are part of it. You just want to go, is she okay? And sometimes that needs to be done in person. But those phone calls will often come in, and not only to me, I've got a great team of people that hopefully we make those calls first and go, I just want to talk you through this and maybe it's time to come down. We'll always make that call if we think it's necessary. And, but I'll always say to a mum, in the end, you're her mum. What's your gut telling you to do? What's your gut saying? And whether you've got your L plates on or not, Amanda, you actually know your children.
Yeah.
You know them better than we do.
Yeah.
And so my thing is, as I said, I'll say it all the time, what's your gut telling you to do? And they might say, I just need to get her out for a while. And you go, okay, let's work it out. A little bit harder sometimes when they're in the middle of trials or HSC or something like that. But we work around. That's how we work around it, and it's just the conversation that's half the battle. Just the conversation, and it is sometimes you need to reach out, but hopefully we've also got enough knowledge now that we go, she's not travelling well. We're going to make a call. So I think that's it.
Yeah. And Lisa, just one final point. If you're speaking to parents and trying to get them to understand or build up trust, how would you advise them to go around building that trust up with the school so that they trust the school in those situations to support their child? And, like I say, these situations may not necessarily be traumatic, but to the child or the teenager that day, it is everything. And they're not getting to go home and offload to older brother, sister, mum or dad.
Yeah, it's such a interesting thing. And I know I keep coming back to, the culture of the family matched to the culture of the school. And I think that is a piece of work that needs to be done and I think is done very well in many cases, where the school is very upfront about what they value and what they see as the way forward and what our strategies are. And the parents are then also bought into that sort of tent and given some information. And I know I have grown enormously from my experience in working with certain schools. And certainly our experience, Amanda, with King's was extraordinary in terms of the education that they gave parents around how boys need to mature, etc. That was amazing. And I would say that they were very proactive about shaping the parent expectations in boarding. One of the things that I saw recently in another school was they used a SUD scale to try and help parents have the same dialogue with kids. So that's a scale where you say, So how bad is it? Not unlike what Ruby was flagging, is this sort of on a ranking from 0 to 10? Where is this problem? What do you need me to do? Is this a jump in the car moment, or is this actually just let's sit and listen? And it was something that they were doing as a whole boarding cohort. The other thing, I'll just flag one more thought for parents, is that we're talking a lot about individual kids, but I think the culture of a year is also a thing.
Oh, yes.
Certainly, certain years are, cope differently, have a different level of resilience than others. And some years have had really difficult times. And we saw through the COVID pandemic, a level of anxiety rise in a group. We see different events in the world shaping different levels of stress and tolerance in groups. And I would say where there are catastrophic events that can happen in a boarding school, even major changes in the leadership, all of those things change the way that the boarding house culture looks. And it's just really important that everyone's transparent about communicating them, putting the red flag up, saying, look, we've had a major change here, we've had a shift here, we've got a problem, we've had a flood in a basement, whatever. And those sorts of things do help in creating that trust and that cultural piece. So I sort of put in a plug for being aware of different cultures, because I think for me that's been probably the most helpful thing in managing the cohort of parents and the cohort of kids.
That's so interesting. That's the other thing I always say to parents, they're all good schools. Make sure your cultures, your values align, and you cannot pick your child's year group. Sometimes it's just a fail, and that's nobody's fault. Tom, we're going to wrap up, but I just want to ask you, do you think that ABSA, Australian Boarding Schools Association, with the incredible training that they do for staff and the support that they offer staff, are also speaking to parents or training staff how to speak to parents, deal with parents, not just the kids themselves?
I was just going to add on a bit of a separate note, I guess, to finish, is do keep high expectations of the boarding school, and don't expect them to be perfect. They will make mistakes, and bring that to the head of boarding's attention, and work together to try to learn and fix it, because the worst thing that can happen is for it to happen to another child or whatever. But there's a lot of new staff coming into boarding schools. It's a different dynamic, like everyone just talked about, each cohort, and they will make mistakes. So expect that to happen. It's not going to be perfect, but just talk with the school to try to learn from it and manage the situation. Keep high expectations. Just the other thing I was going to note was there's a lot of work going around certification for schools, especially in New South Wales. It's happened for a long time, but other states, it's starting to pick up and build up. So look and keep those expectations high, and ask the schools what they're doing to meet those standards too.
Yeah, great advice, Tom. Thank you. Ruby, we're just wrapping up and we'll give you the final comment. Mm-hmm. How do you see things have improved in this space in support for not only boarding staff, but the students themselves since you finished school only a few years ago?
I think generally there's just more awareness around the need to kind of all work together to protect a young person's mental health. So I think, the stigma around mental health and mental illness is shifting, which is great to see. So there's more conversation around it. And I think parents can really lead by example in, expressing how they're going on a day-to-day basis, so that young people feel comfortable to do the same, so that they're not just reaching out kind of at their crisis point. I think another thing that is working really well is schools and parents and communities actually asking young people what they need, what support they need, because when we're talking about boarders, they're usually between the ages of 12 to 18. They're highly intelligent and they know themselves better than I think we give them credit for. So I think actually, empowering boarding schools to say to the students, what kind of support is it that you're looking for? And I think giving them a bit more, I guess, autonomy over the supports that are coming into the schools or the support that they're getting internally makes them feel more empowered to engage with that support. And if it doesn't work or they're disengaged, you can kind of not say, well, this is what you asked for. But I think sometimes it is a matter of actually saying, what kind of support is it that you need? And I think that's starting to shift and working really well in boarding schools.
Thank you, Ruby. Thank you, everyone. Such valuable advice and input from all of you. And thank you for joining us.